and welcome back to Oddtober, the yearly review series where we take a look at all things Oddworld. This time we're going to be taking a look at the second game released on the Game Boy line of systems, with Oddworld Adventures 2 for the Game Boy Color. This is actually one of those games that, despite being a Game Boy Color game, is actually backwards compatible and works on the original Game Boy hardware, albeit with some of the colour and visual features missing. Just like with the previous video though, instead of playing this game on the actual Game Boy hardware, I'm going to be using the Game Boy player for the Nintendo GameCube in order to record footage from it. By doing this, the enhancements found with the Game Boy Color are automatically applied. So, we'll be experiencing the game as it was properly intended to be experienced. But the question is, will Abe's second portable adventure turn out to be better than the first one? Let's pop it in and take a look. Oddworld Adventures 2 is a demake of Oddworld Abe's Exoddus, which was kinda to be expected considering the first Adventures game was a demake of Abe's Odyssey. But it turns out that Adventures 2 might not be quite as much of a demake, because pretty much instantly you can tell that visually this is going to be a pretty big step up from the original Game Boy game. It opens with a shot of Abe's face as he says hello to us, and surprisingly, the graphics and audio quality are pretty great. It uses the voice samples from the actual PS1 versions of the game and then downgrades them to work with the Game Boy's hardware, and it actually works pretty well. The main menu is also quite a step up from the first game. We have a nice background that's reminiscent of the actual Abe's Exoddus, and once again we have a GameSpeak option. Not only do we have a much more detailed and better quality version of Abe's face here, which is displayed in pseudo 3D, but we can also access GameSpeak options for Sligs and Gluckons too, which is pretty incredible and implies that we'll be possessing more than just Sligs this time around. We actually also have access to some more options here, like the language selection and difficulty settings. Obviously, with me being a hardcore Oddworld veteran, I'm going with the hardest difficulty. But it's interesting the game has this considering the console counterpart didn't have difficulties. Starting the game gives us a look at an opening cutscene. Just like the first game, this consists of simple text with static pixely renditions of the cutscenes from the PS1 version. Because this is on the Game Boy Color though, the pictures here are much higher quality than the previous Game Boy game, and the text also scrolls, making it feel much more dynamic and interesting than Adventures 1. An added bonus here is that we're actually starting at the beginning of the story rather than halfway through, meaning that Adventures 2 tells a much more faithful recreation of the Abe's Exoddus story than what Adventures 1 did with Abe's Odyssey. Do you remember that scary scene from the PS1 version of the game, where a Madokan with his eyes stitched shut turns around and we get a close-up of every gruesome detail? Of course you do. But, just in case you forgot about it, here it is again.
They used Budokan slaves to do it. Blind ones that couldn't see.
Well, you'll be happy to know that this shot has been recaptured in all its glory in the Game Boy Color version of the game. You just can't escape the terror no matter where you are. Then the game actually begins, and whoa, this actually looks significantly better than Adventures 1. We have actual backgrounds here and there's way more complexity in the foreground too. I mean, there's even a good amount of attention to detail here, with things like Abe's wanted poster being slapped onto some of the walls. That's awesome. Does anyone else think that the sprites here look a bit worse though? Abe looks a little bit stretched out and more lanky than usual. It's nothing too awful, but it is a bit weird considering I thought the first Game Boy game's sprite work was really solid. The Sligs and most of the other creatures look fine, but Abe himself is just a bit off. The controls this time around are so much better as well. You can now press up on the D-pad to jump straight up, and pressing B will make Abe do a forward jump. Pressing A interacts with things, while holding it activates GameSpeak options which are mapped to the D-pad. Then pressing the select button toggles a sneak mode, while holding it makes Abe chant. This is far superior to the previous game, and while it's still not ideal, this is really the best mapping they could have possibly done considering the lack of buttons on the Game Boy Color. Despite the mapping being good though, I did find myself having a couple of issues in this department. Firstly, there's a bit of lag sometimes when you press a button, and it can result in it dropping inputs completely. This can result in situations like not being able to hoist yourself up onto a ledge quick enough and then dying because of it. But then the game can also sometimes pick up a single button tap as you're holding it, making you do stuff like moving too far into harm's way, or sometimes even making you chant instead of sneak. This actually killed me quite a few times, and it was really irritating. It's a real shame this is an issue because they almost had the controls feeling spot on. A small oddity I noticed with this game, pun intended, is that the game's cartridge and box art refer to it as Oddworld Adventures 2, with the 2 being an actual number, whereas the in-game graphics refer to it as Oddworld Adventures 2 with the 2 being Roman numerals. I don't know where I'm going with this observation, but I did think it was a bit weird how there was an inconsistency there. Like, what is the actual name of this game then? I'm gonna go with the number 2, but who knows if that's right. Something else this game does way better than the first one is that it actually utilises a proper GameSpeak mechanic and has a few Medokans to find and rescue. This makes it feel way more like a genuine Oddworld game and gives a good amount of replay value because you might miss some Medokans on a first attempt and want to go back and replay it to get them all. But a really big issue is that some of the secret areas you find the Medokans in are a bit too obtuse to find. Sometimes you'll just have to blindly jump across a gap or roll through a solid wall where it doesn't even look like there would be anything. And it's not like the proper Abe's Exoddus where secret areas are implied to be there with brew bottles being present wherever there's a secret. It's more like Abe's Odyssey where there's no implication at all, which is kinda rubbish. What sort of mitigates this problem to a certain extent though is that you can pause the game and see a tally chart showing how many Medokans are in the area you're currently on, as well as how many you've killed and how many are left in the game overall. The actual PS1 games did this to a degree by having these charts placed in the world itself rather than on a pause menu. But you know what? I actually kinda think that having this on the pause menu is better in a lot of ways. In the actual game, there's massive lengths of time where there's no tally chart, yet there's tons of hidden areas to find, making it super easy to miss things. But here, you can just open up the pause screen at any time, see if there's any Medokans, and then you know to be looking for secrets or not. You still have to actually find the secrets for yourself, so it's not like it gives too much information away either. So I would say that this is one area that Oddworld Adventures 2 is actually better than the game it's based on. Another pretty impressive element of the game here is the amount of variety being thrown at us. Literally just in the first level of the game, we have 2 secret areas where Medokans can be communicated with. We have a Soulstorm brew machine where we can possess a fart to kill a slig. We have motion sensors teaching us to stay still when they're on us. And we have lots of moving into the background by jumping into wells. This is seriously awesome, and what makes it better is that this is an originally designed level too. I have to say, I really wasn't expecting this game to give me this good of a first impression. So far, I'm actually pretty impressed with it. After the tutorial section, which is set in Necrum Mines, we get teleported to the Paramite Vault, which is basically a one-to-one translation of the Medomo vaults from Abe's Exoddus. The interesting spin that this game puts onto these familiar level designs though is that the secret areas from the original are gone and replaced with brand new secret areas that are in completely different locations. This is pretty amazing to see for someone like me who's familiar with the original game because it gives me a taste of what it must be like to not know where everything is. It's like I'm playing it for the first time again, which is pretty cool. With these levels being the same as the ones from the original game, we have lots of examples of possessing paramites, which is another aspect of the game I really didn't expect to see. The paramites even have access to all of the same abilities they do in the console version, like they're able to go up and down webs and kill fleechers. Only it's much more badass in this game because for some reason the fleechers are blown up when the paramite attacks them. Hell yeah, exploding fleechers. Now that's something that even the original Abe's Exoddus didn't have. Certain levels are cut from the game, probably to make it shorter due to it being on a handheld device, but I imagine another reason for this is probably due to the fact that the paramites don't have their own game speak. But I don't really mind this because it's impressive enough that we can possess paramites at all. Something I noticed at this point is that you can turn the music off by accessing the pause menu. What's cool about this though is that when you turn the music on and off, you'll hear Abe interacting with you, and I found that really charming. Now, turning the music off is something I'm not going to do because I kind of want to experience everything the game has to offer. But honestly, I probably would recommend that you do turn this off if you want to play it for yourself. Some of the songs here are used again and again, so not only does it become repetitive, but some of the tracks don't fit the tone of the Oddworld games at all. Just listen to this one, it's way too sporadic and intense, and it kinda feels like it should be in a different game. Yet again though, the music is actually somewhat dynamic, not only changing when an enemy is present on the screen, but also changing depending on what creature you've possessed too. You can really tell with stuff like this that the developers were trying to go above and beyond when making this game. You remember how in the original Abe's Exoddus they implemented a quick save mechanic which allowed you to basically create your own checkpoint wherever you wanted? And you remember how this was probably implemented due to the game's difficulty being pretty darn high? Well yeah, you can't quick save in Oddworld Adventures 2, and like I've said, it uses a lot of the same level design as the original game, and on top of that we have significantly worse controls too. That isn't a good mix, but at least for now, it's not too bad of an issue due to the levels being somewhat short and easy to deal with. I imagine that later on though, this is going to become a serious issue. The next area we find ourselves in is the Scrab Vaults, which, as you would expect, is a recreation of the Madanshi Vaults from the proper game. Here you'll be coming across scrabs that you're actually able to possess. But to be honest, this is never really utilised in this game, and there's only like 2 scrabs even featured at all here, which is a bit weird. Some of the levels in this area actually use designs from Necrum rather than Madanshi, and I suspect that maybe this was due to some of the levels in the proper game being too difficult to replicate. Or maybe they just preferred the designs of some of the Necrum levels and put them here because where else would they go? So far, in general, I would say that this game has been pretty darn incredible. It's pretty much just a one-to-one translation from the original PS1 game, only significantly cut down in content, and with a newly designed tutorial section. But the fact they actually managed to pull that off is pretty impressive. Just like the original Abe's Exoddus, we've got a ton of mechanics here. We've got Scrab and Paramite possession, we've got Spirit Locks, we've got an invisibility power-up, and we've also got a ton of threats and obstacles too, like Fleechers, the Paramites and Scrabs themselves, falling objects, and way more. This is a pretty damn technically impressive game, that's for sure. After finishing the Scrab and Paramite sections of the game, we actually skip way further ahead, bypassing the Fico Depot, Slig Barracks and Boneworks, and instead going straight to Soulstorm Brewery. What's interesting though is that some of the level designs here are actually taken from those previous areas, but they're now set within the brewery. So although the story has kinda skipped a huge chunk out, we still have some of the same levels to go through. This here is where the difficulty of the game ramps up considerably. Some of these areas are absolutely massive, and unlike in the original game, you now need to do them in one perfect run, or you'll be reset all the way to the start. Take this level for example, where you need to avoid this flying mine, rescue a Madokan in a secret area, possess a Slig to unlock a door, possess a flying Slig and kill all of the remaining threats in the level that you can, climb up and enter these side rooms, avoid electric gates that are turning on and off in a complex pattern, deactivate timed bombs, which by the way are just as annoying to get past as the ones from Oddworld Adventures 1, get past another flying bomb and possess another flying Slig to eliminate another room filled with threats, and then do a ton of platforming all throughout the level. Literally all of that is in one single level, and if you die at any point, it's back to the start. I really feel like they should have had checkpoints here because this is insane. Like seriously, this is probably harder than anything you need to do in Abe's Odyssey or Exoddus combined. It's like you're playing a fan-made modded hard version of the game or something. Something else to mention here is that when you enter the brewery levels, they do still use the same level designs as the PS1 game, but I feel like they're significantly tweaked in a lot of areas, with it cutting some sections out and replacing some others with newly designed elements. It actually kinda feels fresh playing the second half of the game here, because it's been changed so much that at times it's barely recognisable as being the same at all. But because of that, I kinda think they should have just have gone even further and maybe separated some of these excruciatingly long levels into 2 areas or something, because it's pretty intense getting through some of this. Remember how I said that the enemy sprites in this game look pretty good, despite Abe himself looking a bit weird? Well, look what they've done to these slogs. They don't even look like slugs anymore. What happened here? They looked absolutely fine in Adventures 1, but here they look ridiculous. It's here where we enter the Soulstorm Brewery vaults, and this is where yet another big flaw rears its ugly head. It's sometimes very unobvious as to which door is a level exit door and which is a door leading to a Madokan area. Multiple times I had to reset the game and enter a password because I accidentally exited a level, and of course, once you do that, you can't go back in. Luckily it's not too bad because you get a password after every level, and the passwords remember how many Madokans you've rescued, so it's not like you lose any major progress, but still, couldn't they have made the exit doors look different or something? Some of the secrets here are actually really well done, which is in contrast to some of the earlier ones, which felt far too hidden and not logical at all. There was this one where you reach the end of a level and see an area that looks like you can drop down to it from above. So you go back around and fall down a hole where it would be, and it actually drops you down to the secret area. I liked this because it made the level feel like an interconnected place, as opposed to just consisting of separate video game screens. And I think this was a really good example of an implied secret area, rather than one that's impossible to find without trial and error. Why couldn't all of the secrets have been handled like this? There was also this level that took me by surprise, because for a while I was thinking it was a lot harder than what it actually is, due to this floating bomb being really difficult to avoid while having a Madokan following you. But then, I discovered something absolutely earth-shattering. Madokans can roll in this game. Now this is really strange, because this is the only time in the entire game where you need to do this. But not only that, this is the only game in the entire franchise where Madokans other than Abe can roll. They can't even do that in the proper Abe's Exoddus. The final level of the game is another originally designed one, where instead of activating a timer and escaping the brewery like in the actual game, you instead need to go through 4 gauntlets all in a row without dying and pull levers at the end of them to shut the brewery down. It's pretty damn tough as you can imagine, and it's yet another example of the game being in desperate need of the quick save mechanic. But in the end, we did it. And we achieved 100% completion by rescuing all 31 Medokans. Yeah, that's right, there's 31 Medokans in this game. It's a bit of a weird number to end on, but that's the way it is, I'm afraid. I'm not sure if you get a different ending if you don't get all of the Medokans, but the ending I got said, "Finally, the Medokans have all been saved," which I'm guessing only appears if you achieve 100%. I mean, to be honest, that's a bit of a lame reward if that is the case, but this is something that even the PS1 games struggled with. Neither of them had particularly great completion rewards, so I guess you can't expect the Game Boy Color version to improve on that aspect. Oddworld Adventures 2 is a pretty weird one to conclude. On the one hand, it's a pretty good translation of the original game, and it's better than Oddworld Adventures 1 in practically every way. But then on the other hand, the controls are pretty clunky, and it features some levels that are way too long and frustrating, and don't even feature any checkpoints, making it a bit of a slog to reach the end. Heh. Slog. I'm putting Oddworld Adventures 2 in 5th place in my series ranking. It's significantly better than the first Oddworld Adventures, but with it being a much watered down and ultimately worse version of the original Abe's Exoddus, it really doesn't have much value outside of being a novelty. Despite me not liking Munch's Odyssey much, I can at least appreciate the ambition behind it, and the fact that it's a fully original title which continues the main story kind of automatically places it slightly above this. For what it is though, Oddworld Adventures 2 for the most part is a positive experience. The amount of mechanics brought over from the main game is incredible, the variety in environments is appreciated, and even though its story is much abridged from the PS1 game, you still get a decent impression of what it's about. If there were 2 ways that I would say this is better than its console counterpart, I would say that I liked how Abe turns green when he drinks a Soulstorm brew, as if he's been made ill from it. And I also very much liked how you could see a Medokan tally chart for every single area of the game too. If we compare it to the first Oddworld Adventures though, this is the superior game in almost every single way. It's much bigger in scope, the controls are better, the graphics are more detailed, the story is more fleshed out, and it has way more substance with its level design and mechanics. Like we have game speak, possession, we have a wider selection of threats and obstacles, and way more. And if we have a look at the amount of enemies featured here, we have a surprisingly big amount, spanning across sligs, scrabs, paramites, fleechers, gluckons, flying sligs, and slogs. And the majority of those can all be possessed too. The only thing better about the first game over this one is that some of the sprite work was better in Adventures 1. But beyond that, Adventures 2 improves on everything. So, having said that, would I recommend playing Oddworld Adventures 2? Well, no, not really. Again, just like with the first one, the only people I would say should even consider picking this up are people who are fanatics of the series and just want to experience everything it's got to offer. For anyone else, there's no real reason to play this over the much better PS1 or PC versions. Even the advantage of this being a portable version is no longer valid due to the PSP and PS Vita having the PS1 versions available on the store. So nowadays it doesn't even have that to its name. And that's Oddworld Adventures 2, a game which I would say is technically impressive due to it being a pretty decent portable take of Oddworld Abe's Exoddus, but I doubt I'll be revisiting it anytime soon. Next week though, we're going to be taking a look at the third game released in the Game Boy line of systems, with the Game Boy Advance port of Oddworld Munch's Odyssey. I'm looking forward to reviewing this game in particular, because if it turns out to be in any way decent, it might actually be better than the console version of the game, and might be my preferred way of experiencing Muncher's Odyssey. But just because I think the idea of it is promising, doesn't mean that it'll actually be executed well. So, join me next week as we take a deep dive into it. Until then, if you enjoyed this video, give it a like, subscribe to see more stuff like this coming soon, and leave a comment down below letting me know what you think to Oddworld Adventures 2. And, until next time, bye!